Okay, it's time. So let me start the meeting between international advisors and the NRA, Nuclear Regulation Authority. Well, first of all, I would like to say thank you very much for coming and participate to the meeting. And let me introduce 4 international advisors quite briefly. First, Dr. Richard Meserve, former chairman of the USNRC, and also the current chairperson of the INSAG, which is the advisory board to the Director General of the IAEA. And Dr. Andy Hall, former chief inspector of the UK's regulatory body. And Dr. Dana Drabova, well, she has been in the president of the regulatory body of Czech Republic for many years. 20 years. And also currently she is the chairperson of the CSS, Committee of Safety Standards of the IAEA. And Mr. Philippe Jamet, he's a former commissioner of the French regulatory body, ASN. If I'm wrong, please correct it. Okay. And in this morning and in this afternoon, we have made a briefing about the situation of regarding 2 topics. First topic is regulatory requirement, or I should say regulatory standards produced by NRA and regulatory standard shown by the IAEA. So relationship of the international standards and our domestic standard. And the second topic is regards with communications between regulatory body and the stakeholders. So let me start from the topic 1, just a brief explanation about the situation in my country from the one of the commissioners. Please, Commissioner Yamanaka.
So thank you very much for coming today. So first topic this morning is the international standards and regulations of NRA Japan. And some people in Japan usually say NRA have the highest level of regulations for nuclear power plants in the world. So general public strongly pay attention whether NRA regulations are consistent with the international standards such as IAEA requirement and guides. So we discussed this morning the situation of NRA regulation under international standards. As one of particular example, we discuss natural hazard. Commissioner Dr. Ishiwatari will talk about it later. So here I'd like to get in touch with Specialized Safety Facility, SSF. Since this program is also related with the topic 2, communication with the stakeholders. Based on the lessons learned from Fukushima Daiichi accident, the NRA formulated a new regulatory requirement including serious severe accident, such as the ones caused by deliberated large scale aircraft collision against nuclear power plant. Under this requirement, it is required to install the Specialized Safety Facility, SSF, in addition to measures using mobile equipment. The deadline of implementation of SSF is set to 5 years from the approval date of construction plan for main facilities. Since SSF is a backup measure for further improvement of liability against SA, and certain time period is necessary for its safety reviews and construction. If implementation is not completed at the time when the deadline has passed, the nuclear facility will fall into the status of non-conformity with requirements. NRA has decided NRA can order the NPP cannot continue the operation in the case implementation is not completed after deadline. I think the moratorium period for SSF of 5 years is enough for reviewing construction and inspection from technological and public viewpoints. NRA decided 5 years through public comments process after the NRA had several meetings with CNOs and CEOs of licensees. Although the licensee were able to give us their request for extension of deadline, they did not. The licensees well understood the situation of deadline of SSF. So next, Commissioner Dr. Ishibata.
Well, thank you very much for coming to Japan and make many valuable advices hereafter. And I have to say that our regulation on the natural hazard have been evaluated in the IRRS mission of IAEA 3 years ago in 2016, that the NRA's prompt and effective incorporation of the lessons learned from the TEPCO Fukushima Daiichi accident in the areas of natural hazards, severe accident management, emergency preparedness, and backfitting of existing facilities into the new regulatory framework was regarded as a good practice. And in the IRRS report, there is no further comments on our regulation on the related to the natural hazards. And in this morning, I briefly introduced our recent backfitting practice due to obtaining a new knowledge in the field of natural hazard. And I gave you 3 examples, like identification of a thickness of volcanic ash that will deposit in the nuclear power plant site when the nearby volcano erupts. And we found new evidence of thickness of the to be deposited on the ground, and we asked the revision of the safety measures for some nuclear power plants of the Kansai Electric Power Company. And the other example is a tsunami without tsunami warning. Such kind of tsunami may be caused by either volcanic eruption in the oceanic area or submarine landslide, and such tsunami come to the nuclear plant site without any previous warning. So we have to we observed the big damage of such kind of tsunami in Indonesia last year. We decided to apply a backfitting of this kind of measures to tsunami without tsunami warning. This is a second example. And the third example, that was finished about 1 year ago. It's a concentration of a volcanic ash in the air when the volcanic eruption happens. So if the volcanic ash is concentrated in the air, it may cause damage to the emergency diesel generator to cool down the nuclear plant core. And so we already ordered backfitting, and the licensees already implemented the measures, that is a filter unit for the diesel generator aspirator. And these are the recent 3 examples, and we are also doing now on progress, but we are making a backfitting related to seismic ground motion of the nuclear power plants by the earthquakes with their epicenters not identified. That means small earthquakes that may happen directly beneath the plant site. So such earthquakes are not big, small, but it happens directly near the power plant, and it may cause damage. So this backfitting is now on progress. So that's that I explained this morning. Yeah.
Okay. So.
Thank you very much. Let me get this started. The first topic to discuss is the international standards, and Dana will take the lead on describing that, and as you indicated in her introduction, she's been very much in the middle of the generation of the IAEA standards. I'll take the lead with regard to communication with stakeholders, and in that context, I'll make some comments about the specialized safety facilities. And both Andy and Philippe will comment, I'm sure, on both topics.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for inviting me again to discuss with my distinguished Japanese colleagues various interesting and useful items. And as it was mentioned by Chairman Fuketa in his kind introductory remarks, I have also the honor to be for 8 years a chair of IAEA Commission on Safety Standards, which is a high-level body in the endorsement process of safety standards. What I would like to mention briefly is the process of drafting and endorsing agency safety standards, as well as the intention how they should serve as a tool for creating a national legislation in individual member states. First of all, I would like to mention that safety standards series are called IAEA safety standards, but in fact, those are member state safety standards, because the whole process of drafting and endorsement is in the hand of member states, and input of member states representatives on various stages of drafting and endorsement safety standards is essential, because in the end safety standards, and it doesn't matter if safety fundamentals as the top of the pyramid or safety requirements or safety guides, are the result of consensus among member states. And for high-level safety standards, that means safety fundamentals and safety requirements, also the endorsement of the Board of Governors of IAEA is needed as a final step before publication. Why I'm describing that? Because for instance, if we discussed roughly the area of natural hazards this morning, it is very important that the big experience gathered in Japan with this topic will be reflected in safety standards, so as the safety standards can really be state-of-the-art requirements that guide the nuclear community in the world to do the best thing reasonably achievable to achieve the high safety standard, high level of nuclear safety. Nevertheless, we have to have in mind that the safety standards of the IAEA are not legally binding. That means it's a tool for governments and national nuclear safety regulators how the national legislation should look like. What concerns the requirements level, it is expected that requirements will be somehow mirrored in the national legislation. It doesn't necessarily mean that it is word by word transposition, but the subject or intent of each and every requirement should be addressed in national legislation. The situation is different with the level of safety guides, because safety guides are intended to explain one way, one method how to achieve the fulfillment of individual requirements. But by no case it's the only way how to achieve the intent of safety requirement. That means that there will be a need for a flexibility to let, for instance, licensee or operator of nuclear power plant to do the best thing he knows to achieve the intent of the requirement, and usually he is asked to show that the level of safety, if the operator uses its own method, is at least the same as that described in safety guide. That means that even in requirements and especially in safety guides, there can be and are deviations. But the regulator must be able openly describe and openly discuss the reasons for such deviations. And this is the basic approach of the application of IAEA safety standards in individual member states. Of course, there are member states, especially among the newcomers to nuclear programs, that use the IAEA safety standards and in a way that they simply copy them in their national legislation. But for traditional long-term operators of nuclear power plants, I don't think this is the best way, because the agency safety standards are, as I have mentioned, a matter of consensus of member states and not necessarily the best practice achievable. Thank you.
Thank you.
I might add just some additional comments. I think that we all should recognize that the challenges that might be confronted by a nuclear plant differ from country to country. And so in Japan, we'd anticipate that the regulator in the utilities should be particularly concerned about earthquakes and tsunamis, for example, and volcanism, of course, as well. And so one would anticipate that the regulatory requirements would recognize that those external threats present some special risks that the regulator should attend to, as should the utilities. So one ought to anticipate that international standards that are in a general sense might have to be tailored to the individual country to reflect the local environment. And also, of course, countries have different legal standards, are culturally different, and all of those things could affect how the regulatory system is structured. So I think as Mr. Vova has indicated, that one would anticipate that the requirements are to be satisfied in the IEA requirements. We anticipate they'd be satisfied, but that the specific substance of them might vary from country to country and differ from those that are provided in the guidance based on the local circumstances. There's a second aspect of this that I'll just mention that at the moment doesn't look at this as if it's particularly relevant to Japan, but there are opportunities if you were doing new construction to enhance safety in a way that is not possible or not prohibitively expensive to do it in existing plants. And I think everyone would anticipate that if one were to build plants today, you'd do it somewhat differently than you did in the past, and you've learned, and that the safety achievements would be greater. So one ought to recognize that there are other factors that play in onto how you apply the standards, that recognizing the practicality. In the United States, we also recognize that the cost benefit of changes as part of our analysis. So in any event, I just want to mention that there's not a standardized approach on these issues, nor should there be.
Thank you. I think it's important to recognize that the IEA standards development process relies on the inputs from the individual member states, all of which may contribute to the process, although you'll find that some have a greater interest and some have a lesser interest. But as Japan has got first-hand knowledge of large natural hazards, I'd encourage it to contribute energetically to that process and help influence the standards and the outcomes that you get from that.
Well, it's difficult to first, thank you for inviting me, and I'm very happy if I can contribute to NRA success. It's difficult to speak after three such speakers, so I will just highlight 2 points that I think have already been said and are very important. The first one is what Andy just said, because in substance, what Andy said is that you have the standards that you have accepted. So in other words, if in the process of preparing the safety standards, specifically for the requirements, but also for the guides, you think that something is not reasonable, then you should say it, and you should fight for being understood at the agency. And anyway, you have a sort of veto power. If you fight strong enough, they cannot publish a standard with which you don't agree. So this is the first things. But once the standard is agreed, this is also a Japanese standard to a certain way. So this is my first point. The second point is that, and I'm not going to talk about the guides, only the requirements. I think the requirements are written in such a way that they can be incorporated in a regulation directly. But frankly speaking, this is very relevant for newcomers to nuclear energy, but for countries where there is already a legislation, things were existed before and so on, it's not really relevant. So what is relevant is to incorporate in your regulation the substance or the intent or what they really mean, rather than the words that have been used to draft them. But then, you know, because, and I'm going to talk about the requirements, because you have accepted them as they are written, and they are written like you shall comply with them. So they are not legally binding, but it's explicitly said that in order for your installation to be safe, you have to apply them. This is the whole spirit. And I'm going to go one more step, and if possible, you should do better. And this is what's recognized as good practices by the Convention of Nuclear Safety and also by the results of the peer review organized by IAEA, sorry. And this is somehow a way to promote continuous improvement of safety.
Well, thank you. And I should say, the Commission and also all the NLA staff members has a well understanding about the procedure of how IAEA standards are produced. And we know that we have a number of the opportunities to communicate with the other members with different states. I mean, at the of course the CSS, but which is a lot of higher level of the Commission to produce and endorse the required standards. But also we have a lower level of opportunity, NUSC or WASC or TRANSC, or there are lots of committees. So we understand that we have opportunity to disclose our opinions and views and opinions. But sometimes we face difficulties when we asked about literal compliance between our national standard and IAEA standards. The most important thing is the fact and the core value of the both standards. But sometimes we have been asked about the retail compliance between two standards. So that's what that's one of the difficulty we experienced. And also, we need to, not only the NLA, but also all the stakeholders should understand the structure of the IAEA standards. As Dr. Durabova mentioned, the top level of the safety fundamentals and the safety requirements, and then the safety guide and the guidance. It just shows the way to fulfill the requirement. So, but we still have this may be the regards with the second topic, but this may be a communication problem. But we try to have a better explanation, better skill for the explanation about the structure of the international standards and also the meaning or the value of the guide. Not the requirement, but an example to fit the requirement. So, any comments or any? Sure.
Without any doubt, this is the issue for each and every nuclear regulator because we can advise from our experience, but it's a never-ending process of explanation and explanation and explanation. Even if I speak for the Czech Republic, even in Czech Republic.
Okay.
I might amend your comment slightly. Mm-hmm. You described the guide as providing the way to satisfy the requirements. I would amend it slightly to say that the guidance documents provide a way to satisfy the requirements, but they intentionally leave open the opportunity to satisfy the requirements in a different fashion. If you achieve the requirement, you don't need to follow what's in the guides. You can do it differently, and that's perfectly acceptable. It's the idea is to provide basically a way for someone to understand a satisfactory means to do it, but it doesn't foreclose other ways to show the compliance?
That is a quite important point, and not only between international standard and national standard, but in also the different opportunity. I mean, when we produced our requirement, countermeasure against a severe accident, we kept saying the Plan B will be welcome or more than welcome. Well, we showed a way to satisfy the requirement as a guide, but you know, Plan B or Plan C are welcomed, and also in terms of the safety culture or safety attitude to the safety, it is a good things to produced by operators, or I should say utilities or licensees, by themselves think and find a way to satisfy the requirement. That is the I believe we may find a better way from the proposal from the licenses, because you know, I may call it a Plan A, but the Plan A is produced by the discussions between licensees and regulators in this building. But they may have a more detailed knowledge, experience, and skill to produce Plan B or Plan C to satisfy the requirements. So we encourage the licensee propose the Plan B to satisfy our requirement. But at the same time, a licensee and also regulator would like to have effective and efficient process for the process. And we have a time constraint as well, and they have a time constraint as well. So unfortunately, there are many cases to take just Plan A in the many practices of the licensing procedures.
I think also that a responsible licensee would recognize that with any project there will always be risks to the successful delivery of that project. And so it should be developing a risk register and identifying the means by which it will manage those risks, whether they're financial risks, program risks, or other risks. And that would include alternatives to the Plan A, as you say. And so I would have expected the licensee to have those plans. And I think that in that case, it should be willing to share those plans with the regulator. That is not to say that Plan A won't be successful, but rather to recognize the reality that things might develop the way it would hope them to. Thank you.
Any questions, any comments from the commissioners? Is that okay? Well, we already used more than 30 minutes on topics one, so well, I think we have received the quite good advice, quite good comments from the for members. So let me turn into the next topics. And first, I ask Commissioner Tanaka explain about the situation briefly.
Okay. Thank you for coming to Japan at the busiest time for you. Okay, about the stakeholder communication. Okay, from the beginning of NRA establishment, communication with stakeholders has been one of the important duties to us. We have been communicating with stakeholders, one with local residents, local groups, or local government. Another is communication with licensees. And I would like to explore various ways to better communicate with stakeholders. For example, in order to promote social understanding of a new inspection program and to share common understanding with licensees regarding application of the new regulatory requirements, including backfitting. At the briefing in the morning, we discussed how to improve our communication with stakeholders. Okay, for example, with the licensees, taking SSF as an example, and how to improve communication with the local resident or governments, such as bilateral to multilateral. Okay, so we had made a very good discussion. Maybe we'd like to have the good advice from you. And also the Mr. Ban will say something about that.
Just addition to Commissioner Tanaka's explanation. As he explained, the openness and transparency are a very important basic policy of the NRA. And at the same time, we have to avoid isolation and complacency. So we are making efforts to better communicate with stakeholders. Those stakeholders involve licensees, local government, local people, and media, and so on. And in the morning discussion, there was an indication, for example, that as Commissioner Tanaka explained, from bilateral communication to multilateral communication. In the bilateral communication, only one stakeholder is involved at one time, but try to involve multiple stakeholders at one time. For example, not only licensees, but also local residents and other parties. We have already started that kind of way of communication when the commissioners make a site visit. We try to have a communication with local authorities, governors, and utilities. But the recommendation was to foster, to seek for such a way of communication with wider parties. And also, we discussed the issue of specialized safety facility. As Commissioner Yamanaka explained, we have decided to order shutdown of the plant if the licensees cannot meet the deadline. But for the advisor side, this is not a favorable story. Indeed, when implementing regulations, the both sides, regulators and operators, periodically should communicate and should exchange views. And if some difficulties were found, both sides should have further discussions to avoid and to overcome these difficulties. So this SSF issue can be regarded as a problem in communication in a broad sense. That is a summary from my side.
Well, thank you very much. It was both Commissioner Tanaka and Commissioner Bonner have given an accurate summary of our discussions this morning. Let me say that I'll make a brief mention of a difference that I perceive that maybe is not understood or not appreciated by others. We often use the words openness and transparency. They cover different things, in my view. Transparency refers to the obligation of the regulator to be open to I shouldn't use the word open to explain it, the obligation of the regulator to explain its regulatory decisions, how it made them, to be available to all stakeholders to actually understand how the regulatory process works. Openness refers, in my understanding, to an obligation to reach out to others and get input into your regulatory processes that are informed by the views of stakeholders. By stakeholders, of course, I'm referring not just to licensees, but to local governments to people who oppose nuclear, people who favor nuclear, from vendors, from anybody who can contribute to your understanding an issue is somebody you should be open to get that input. And I was pleased to see, as we discussed this morning, there are lots of provisions in the legislation governing the NRA, but also in your own procedures that create an obligation to be transparent and open in your interactions. So that is something that, as Commissioner Bond has said, is important fundamental value for a regulator, and that it helps in building trust in your decisions and, quite frankly, in making informed decisions, because you have input, the best input you can get by everyone who can contribute to the subject area. We received a lot of information from you about your interactions with various stakeholders. And there were very numerous interactions that were listed that were bilateral, has been explained, between the NRA and individual licensees. Where we thought it might be helpful to expand your interactions was in the multilateral context. Let me speak firstly about licensees, that having an interaction in particular with, for example, the CNOs, the people who are most knowledgeable in the utilities about what they're confronting and what you're confronting, and have communication with them seems to me to be something that, based on the data we have, has not happened perhaps as often as it could have happened, and would be useful to have that interaction more. The creation of ATINA, this new organization, is a vehicle that will help in that respect, but you probably ought not to rely solely on them. I think that direct interaction with the CNOs also is useful, if only because there may be some blind spots for us. You don't want to, no one engaged in the nuclear business wants to have a single point failure, and you could have that if you rely on only one organization. Mr. Jamet will talk about the broader context about multilateral opportunities, about interacting with a broader set of stakeholders in a common forum, and I'll turn to him in a moment for that. Let me say, with regard to communication with stakeholders, in particular with the licensees, I do think that your opening up of the reactor oversight process should be helpful, because there will be more interactions of your inspectors with the licensees, or there should be, that are getting to sort of fundamental risk issues if the program operates as it should. So there should be an opportunity for exchanges there. And let me say, I think that in that context, you need to make sure that what is learned there flows up, so that as there are common issues that are arising, it informs all of your work. Mr. Yamanaka made a very helpful overview of the specialized safety facilities, which is worth some discussion in this context, because, as Mr. Bond has indicated, I think we should all see this as a failure of the need to have openness and transparency with your licensees. As has been explained, these were very complicated, expensive, difficult facilities to build. They were given 5 years within which to do it. That was clearly going to be a challenge to do that complicated facilities in the time, and very difficult at some of the sites. And when we were here last, we had understood that there might be a failure to be able to complete by the deadline, but that it might be a period of months. And then shortly after we left, we learned, in fact, it might be years of a failure to complete the projects by the end of a time. There clearly was a failure of communication between the NRA and the licensees about the basic facts for a very important facility, crucial to the operation of the plants. And it's worth thinking about how that happened and what to do about it. I see that there are some fingers that could be pointed in both directions. The utilities clearly should have been telling you about this problem in a very forceful way very early, so that you could prepare for it, could think about it, have discussions with them about how to respond to the situation, rather than be confronted at the very end with this information that you did not know. But on the other hand, I should say on a major project like this, I think the NRA should have been reaching out to the utilities and as part of project management and trying to understand where they were and very forcefully demand information from them as to how they were doing. I mean, this is something that I think that there were some responsibilities on both sides that need to be confronted. Now, I don't know fundamentally how this happened, but this is a clear issue with regard to communications that everyone involved in the nuclear business should think about and how to assure that it does not happen again. I think both sides have things to learn from it, and I hope and trust that both sides have learned, and so that this kind of a situation does not arise again. So that is sort of a quick summary of our discussions, but let me also say, of course, it was a very informative and helpful day for us on both topics, and we appreciate the effort that was put in by you and your staffs to assemble the material and to have informative discussions with us. Let me turn to Mr. Jamet, who's going to have some observations about the multilateral interactions in a broader context than just licensees.
Thank you very much, Richard. Yeah, when I read your papers and I heard what you said, I was frankly impressed by the number of bilateral meetings you have. You are meeting the company managers of the utility, CEOs, CNOs, you're meeting plant staff at the site, you're meeting local governments, you're meeting local parties, and also Japanese and foreign experts. So that's a really long list, and that's a lot of time and effort you're making, and of course this is very good and this is to be encouraged. What we felt, according to international experience, is that there is another way you might look at, and in a way that would be convenient for you, is to have more multilateral meetings. What we mean by this is to have in the same meeting, for example, representatives of the local government, representatives of the utility, representative of NRA, representative of public associations, representative, for example, of medical doctors, and also representative of NGO. And in such meeting, you could have an agenda that is reviewing some things that are happening locally in the plant, some modifications, some recent events or something like this, and give an opportunity to have a public exchange of all these people together. I see one big advantage of this type of meeting, several advantages, but one is that everybody will hear the same thing at the same time. And so this will avoid discrepancy between discussion with different people 2 by 2, and I think this is a big virtue. The second thing is that for NRA and its impact on the public, I think in such meetings, when you will say things, this will be an occasion to demonstrate your independence, you know, how much you can disagree, for example, with a licensee or maybe with a local government. Also, you can, of course, demonstrate in a very lively manner your transparency and openness, of course. And this, I think, is a really good way to increase the credibility of NRA and its outreach to the public. Concerning the practical way you could organize this, I think you have to define it. I just want to mention that there are experiences which are different in different countries. In the US, they have the RIC conference, where they have plenary meetings or that are devoted to regions, where they are doing things that are very similar to what I've said. And in France, we have the local committee of information, which is a very different thing from RIC, but that can also be, it's an experience that exists and that could help you maybe to organize your own system. So this is what we felt about this multilateral. And thank you very much for also very good meeting and very interesting discussions.
Thank you. As Philippe has said, you have very many meetings on a bilateral level with a lot of stakeholders, and yet, as you've also said, there are issues of communication that you haven't been getting some of the information that you would like to have. And that suggests to me that it is important to think about your communications aims and objectives. Why are you doing the communications? It's not simply because communication is a good thing. It's because you want to achieve something through it. And having considered those aims and objectives, they will inform your strategy, and then they will inform what you actually do in terms of the meetings. And so it might be useful to review the various meetings that you have to see whether or not they align with those aims, objectives, and strategy, and whether there are some gaps in the communications strategy, whether there are other pathways, as Philippe has suggested, other stakeholders that you might wish to meet, and in other ways. But in setting up those meetings, you need to be clear about what it is that you want to gain from them, and equally, what it is that the people that you want to communicate with are going to gain from engaging with you. Because this has to be something in it for them as well. That must be a benefit on both sides to make it worthwhile you coming together. And so I think that that would be worth thinking about.
Maybe one small remark coming back to the specific type of communication or specific case of communication, or if you allow me, I do apologize, miscommunication. I'm going back to this specialized safety facility because, in my opinion, when both sides took on board this huge project, some aspects of project management were not addressed as properly as possible. And what I have especially in mind is a process of monitoring and, say, checkpoints where the progress will be roughly discussed and also where the progress from the part of utility would be requested to be demonstrated, really demonstrated. So it's in my opinion, a big experience and a big occasion for improvement because such huge projects are not uncommon in our business.
Thank you. Let me speak about the SSF issue at first. Just 3 weeks ago, we had a meeting with the CEO and CNO of Kyushu Power, KEPCO, Kyushu Electric Power Company. And Commissioner Ban made a question to CEO whether there was a problem regarding the communication between the NRA and the utility regarding the deadline of the construction of the SSF. And we received an answer from the CEO that was the communication was perfect. No problem at all in communication. Well, I was a little surprised about the answer. And I still believe there existed a failure in communication between the NRA and the utilities. Well, we are confident that we are fully open to the utilities when they made a request, when they would like to say something to the NRA. We always accept to have a meeting with the utilities. However, all the meeting must be open to the public. We cannot meet with them behind the door. because this is our well, one of the fundamentals of the value of the NRA. So we can never have any meeting behind the door with the utilities. And of course, we knew we have a full understanding about how much it is difficult things to construct SSF, because it is a highly complicated big facility. So in a few or more than several opportunities, we made a question whether you can finish the construction of the SSF before the deadline. I clearly remember the Commissioner Yamanaka's remark when he met several CNOs from the utilities. And the answers, they are going to make the best efforts, and they are going to finish the construction before the deadline. So that was an answer we received. So we, quite frankly speaking, we were a little skeptical about the answer from the utilities. But all the answer in front of the public were they are going to make the best efforts, and they will be able to finish the construction before the deadline. And just before the deadline, we heard quite different answer from the utilities. So, well, we are confident we were fully open to the utilities, but however, well, it's quite difficult to describe. But I think there existed a failure regarding the communication. Philip?
Yeah, I understand what you say, but it seems to me that Dana had presented an option that was a little bit different, because basically I'm sure that you were fully open to hear what the utility were saying, or you were ready to organize any meeting they would have requested, and you asked some fairly general questions. Okay, but apparently this was not sufficient. And if you make some experience feedback of this, I would encourage you to do what Dana said, to try to define at the beginning milestones, precise milestones. Where will you finish to design? Where will you start to dig in the mountain or the soil? Where you will pour the first concrete, and so on. And then ask the utility to report on each milestone, because then it would appear much more in advance that they are on the wrong track. If you say, just tell me if you are on the wrong track, and if you have a utility for any reason, you know, political, economical, image, whatever, he can always say, okay, I'll postpone and we'll see. But if you have milestones, it's much more difficult.
Well, I think it is better to show an example about the construction of the SSF, but however, it's also a security-related facility, so I cannot disclose the details about the situation of each SSF. But well, the situation is different in different sites. I mean, some of them are in, you know, well, behind the mountain or underground or something like that, because those facilities is also against the aircraft collision. So it's well, I think that there is we faced difficulties about to define in the period of each stage. You said design and construction or assessment of the site conditions. Well, they are far different in different sites. So it was quite difficult to define the time for each stage before we really have a facility.
But this plan, you can request it from the utility at the beginning.
Excuse me?
You can request the utility to define a precise plan with milestones, not do it yourself. This is his job.
Yeah.
And then you check that the milestones defined by the utility are respected.
We received the plan for the construction of not only the SSF but also all the facilities. In the beginning, in the beginning of the submission regarding the construction of the SSF, we received the plan showing the stage of the construction, design or site inspection, site assessment, and the design, and there is some iterations and the precise design and then construction. And they can, licensee can revise the plan. But in the first case or in the second case, we keep receiving the identical same plan. So even just before the deadline, we received the same sheet of the paper. So we actually made a request to show the step to prepare the SSF before the deadline.
A little bit nasty question, if you allow me. Did you check the plan submitted by the utility with reality in the meantime?
Well, the answer is a yes and no. So it depends on the preciseness. Well, we know I think we know the general figures of their stage of their plan, but we didn't know about the too detail about their construction. Would you like to add something about this? And okay, Andy.
Yes, I was just going to say that the answer no to the question, was there a problem with the communications, suggests that the CNO didn't have the same test of what good communication was as NRA, that there wasn't a shared understanding of the purpose of that communication route. And I think that would be worth exploring, because unless you do have a shared understanding, you will be talking at cross purposes.
Well, I believe that we'd better have the more opportunity to have communications in each level. I mean, we have in the beginning we have only a meeting with the CEO and CNO, and then we received a request or we received a suggestion from one of the CEO, and then we produced another meeting between a few commissioners and the CNOs. And also I made a proposal to have more, the mid-level communications. Well, I believe the implementation of the new inspection system, ROP, should have more opportunities to have mid-level communications. And also, let me answer the Philip's idea. Well, I also think it may be a good idea to have a multilateral opportunity to have discussions. Well, I think I attended RIC more than 5, 6, 7 RIC, and that is a big meeting, and lots of stakeholders are attending, and that looks good opportunity. But at the moment, I am not so confident whether we could have such meeting in Japan, because I don't know how many organizations, how many local governments accept our invitation to the meeting. So let me investigate, or let me make a research, or let me make an investigation about the multilateral or such leak-like meeting can be feasible in this country.
In my notes, I wrote NRA should consider the possibility.
Yeah, so let's consider about that. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Well, I think that the better communication or improved communication is a long-standing issue. I think we consider, and keep learning the better practices from the better international practices. But well, we are struggling, and we are trying to find a better communication with all the stakeholders. And the issue regarding the deadline of the SSF is one of the an example, because we believe we were quite open, but we at the end, well, we encourage licenses be open, but anyway, at the end, there is kind of discrepancy in understanding or between the regulator and the utility. So we should learn something from the event. Yeah. Go ahead.
So thank you for a good comment and advice. And SSF problem appeared to be due to failure of communication, as well as, I think, due to the lack of trust relationship between regulator and licensee. So introduction of a new inspection system, ROP, next April is a good opportunity for multilateral communication. So thank you very much.
So the good communication is the best manner, best way to create the situation like it, respect each other and trust each other. So okay, so we are already behind the time. So so any other final remarks? Yeah.
I have no substantive remarks other than to thank you for providing us with a very interesting day, and I hope that our discussions were helpful to you.
Thank you very much. The NLA hold this meeting with the international advisors once or twice a year, and we keep having this meeting because the advice and learn about best practices are inevitable for our activities as a regulator in this country. So thank you very much. Thank you for coming. Thank you for taking the time and advices. Thank you.